You're listening to RTI Audio, powered by Rocky Top Insider. This is the RTI Press Pass with Rick Butler and Ryan Schumpert.
Here we go. Welcome into the Rocky Top Insider Press Pass. My name is Rick Butler, joined by my good friend Ryan Schumpert. We are here in the studio right now, ready to talk a little bit of Tennessee athletics with you, the great audience members out there. Ryan, good afternoon, my friend. Today is an absolutely beautiful Wednesday afternoon right here in Knoxville, Tennessee. Ryan, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How you doing, Rick?
Hey, not too bad. We got a ton of stuff to get into. I mean, we were kind of talking about it a little bit off air beforehand, but we were trying to decide where we wanted to start, what we wanted to hit. Man, there's Tennessee football, there's Tennessee basketball, there's Tennessee baseball. A lot of things on the menu that we got to get into. But first, before we do, if you don't mind, Ryan, if you don't mind, give me 30 seconds real quick, because as we are starting this podcast, I'm a little nervous.
All right, go for it.
I'm a little nervous because my dishwasher at home, right before I came here, it was giving me some troubles. There's no other way to explain my dishwasher except as, the Jeremy Banks of dishwashers. There is only one setting that it has. There's no delicate, there's no subtle, there's no gentle dishwashing. There is one setting, and it is borderline maniacal. Yeah. So I'm a little bit worried right now because there's like some water leakage going on. I don't know, but my dishwasher, the Jeremy Banks, I think is the only way I can really explain it.
Yeah, it's a wild bull. It kind of sounds like actually the washing machine or laundry in my apartment. Randomly, I wasn't even doing it with one of my roommates a week or two ago. It sounded like there was a brick in there. I literally had to turn it on. Like it was violently shaking. And yeah, it kind of has that Jeremy Banks 150 speed at all times.
Yeah,
bull in a china shop.
I was watching Jeremy Banks at practice the other day. I believe it was on Tuesday. Today is Wednesday, so it's just yesterday. And it's funny kind of watching some of the drills because one of the ones that we have seen countless times, it feels like. And if you've seen any of the practice highlights over on Rocky Top Insider's YouTube account, of course, you've seen it too, where the defensive lineman, the linebacker, somebody will kind of run around in this circle and then hit a tackle dummy with a ball attached to it. And it is just funny because when you watch Jeremy Banks, right, I don't know if there's a perfect way to do that drill. Obviously, it seems like there's a right way to do that drill. You know, you want to stay close to the circle that's laid down there. You don't want to be all over the place. Jeremy Banks running around, he does that drill just like he plays in the game. You know, it's a little bit reckless, but certainly that's kind of the fire that he brings to the table. And I even thought it was interesting talking to linebackers coach Brian Jean-Marie yesterday. He said that it's actually been a big offseason for Jeremy Banks. He is really starting to develop some of that leadership on the field. Not just on the field, but in the locker room as well. I believe it was kind of along the lines of Jean-Marie said that he is slowing down, but he is still keeping that fire and that ferocity that makes him the player that he is.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple. You got to find the way to toe the line. I mean, that intensity is what makes Banks a good player or an effective player, but obviously got him in trouble a few too many times. I was going to say one too many times, a few too many times. I mean, that was a topic of conversation plenty in media opportunities last year with Tennessee coaches of having to rein him in, and it's certainly you want him to go up and toe that line without crossing it, and it's not like there's not a perfect solution to it, but I think something Tennessee certainly is always looking to evolve and kind of find the right answer for.
Yeah, I would say that as well. You know, I guess we might as well just stick with it. We're already talking a little bit of football. We're already talking a little bit of spring camp. One of the most noticeable things that I have seen, and I certainly want to get your thoughts on this, is I've been watching a lot of the defensive side of the ball. Because, I mean, right now in March, we know that going into next season, Tennessee's going to have an explosive offense, just like they did last year, finishing as the 9th best scoring team in the country. We know that Hendon Hooker is going to come back and be the quarterback of this team. Wide receivers, a little bit of a question mark, but Cedric Tillman being back, Jalen Hyatt being back, those are some of the big keys that you think are going to be contributors to Tennessee's offense. It's the defense that I'm watching here in the early stages of practice. And I don't know if you're seeing the same thing as me, but really the biggest worry that I have when I watch this team, and Granted, it's only April, right? It's April 6th today, so there's a long time to go before the season. But it seems like depth is going to certainly be a frequent conversation when we talk about this defense. I think certainly some places are better than others, linebackers being one of them. But is that something that has kind of stood out to you as well, just through these, first 2 weeks of practice so far?
Well, no doubt, and I think that's kind of the case all around the field to a degree. I mean, Tennessee still feels the repercussions of all the players that left in the transfer portal at the end of Jeremy Pruitt's tenure and then after he left. So I think depth all over the field. I think it's especially amplified on the defensive end. One, I think, because I think Heupel's been able to bring in more renowned players or more sought-after players on the offensive side of the ball. But also, you just look at the guys they have out in the back end, and I think that's where I think maybe the biggest question mark, or at least the most spots to be filled for Tennessee's defense going into next year, is in that defensive back room where you lose Theo Jackson and Alontae Taylor. You have the two safeties back, but they didn't play at a particularly high level last year, and you have some young guys who flashed at times and now had some injuries that slowed them down, but you wonder if they can pass them. But all the guys that Tennessee has out in the defensive back room, Kamal Haddon's going to have a chance to start or compete for a starting job. Warren Burrell's going to start probably at corner. And then Deshaun Rucker's one of those young guys we talked about, the good factor in safety. Brandon Turnage, another guy that's going to have a great chance to take Theo Jackson's spot in the nickel. All those guys are out. In Tennessee, once you look behind them, there's not a whole lot of eager bodies waiting, and it's kind of the linebacker position of last spring when Tennessee had, I think 2 scholarship players available there. And it's not that bad. I mean, naturally, you're going to play more defensive backs, so you have a lot more options there. But I think that's an area that, to me, I think is the biggest question mark on Tennessee's team going into next year. And you can't really answer a whole lot of the questions with all the guys that are out. And I think you've seen that in the first couple weeks of spring.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just going back to the press conferences that were going on yesterday, Jalen McCullough said that, it's right now for Tennessee and for the defensive backs that are working over there with Willie Martinez, it's not necessarily hey, this is going to be your position, this is what you're going to do. It's, hey, this is the defensive back's position almost. We are going to learn the scheme, so you are going to know what to do no matter where you are on the field. A lot of people were raving yesterday about Christian Charles and just kind of his transition more towards cornerback, saying that, this kid's going to be really, really talented at cornerback. Obviously, moving to a position like that, going to take a little bit of time, but you can see where that talent could be eventually down the road. And then the other guy that's kind of caught my eye on the defensive side of the ball is Desmond Williams, one of the highest rated transfer products coming out of the junior college ranks. He is going to be a critical defensive back for Tennessee because, Ryan, for every reason that you just said, with all the players who are missing time right now in the spring, with Brandon Turnage being one of the biggest ones, I think about that, because you saw what he was able to do stepping in for Theo Jackson for 1 week last year. I even think he came out of that week as like the SEC Defensive Player of the Week. Am I right?
Defensive Back of the Week, I believe.
There you go. Yeah. Defensive Back of the Week. So he's going to be important, but not being able to see those right now, it's just kind of fascinating watching some of these other guys. But again, for the players that are on the field, Christian Charles and D. Williams, I think, are going to be 2 big names that are getting reps right now that are going to be valuable come this fall.
Yeah, Charles is the one that at the start of spring really stood out to me, or at least in general when you're looking for guys that can replace those 2 guys and maybe guys that could play more at the safety spot. He was the one that stood out because he was really impressive as a freshman last year in fall camp, and he worked his way into the starting lineup in that Missouri game, got hurt in that Missouri game, missed basically the rest of the season. And I can't remember if it was the rest of the season or not. He might have come back in a limited role at the very end, but all the positive momentum that he had built in his first couple months in Knoxville had kind of been stalled from that. But I think he's a guy that's really, really talented. He has the versatility, I think, to really probably play all 5 spots in the defensive backfield. So I think he's a guy that's certainly worth watching and is a good, if you're going to look at how Tennessee can upgrade its talent level in the secondary without having brought in, obviously they brought in Williams, but not a ton of high-profile recruits, haven't brought in any D1 transfers from there. I think Charles is a guy, and Rucker, another one too, I think you kind of look at.
Yeah, Ryan, you talk about upgrading talent. That is certainly something that Tennessee is going to try to do moving forward as well. It's going to be a big weekend coming up on Rocky Top these next couple days, especially on Saturday and Sunday. If you go back about 2 weeks or so, right after Nico Iamaleava gave his verbal commitment to Tennessee, he also did an interview, and he mentioned 2 players in specific that he wanted to bring with him as recruits to Tennessee. He mentioned 2 wide receivers, one of them being Carnell Tate, the other one being Kyler Casper. Well, can't speak for Tate just yet, but we do know that Kyler Casper and Nico will be in Knoxville this weekend, a part of what is really shaping up to be a big, big recruiting weekend here for Tennessee. I got a couple of guys we'll go through and just list them out for you, but certainly Tennessee trying to work towards the future, especially with having Nico on campus. I mean, you need to, right? If you know that he's going to be here, if you know that he's going to be the foundational piece that Tennessee is going to build this recruiting class around, yeah, man, you do want to bring in some of those other players. 4-star running back Trayon Webb will be here. 4-star wide receiver Kyler Casper, like we just talked about. A 2024 offensive lineman, Ian Moore. And then, Ryan, you actually wrote about this today earlier on RockyTopInsider.com. Go check it out. Devin Hyatt, brother of Jalen Hyatt, right now, Tennessee wide receiver. So a lot of things going on campus this weekend.
Yeah, you're right, and I think you make a good point about wanting to get guys in around Nico, and I think that's natural. He's the quarterback. He's the highest-rated guy in your class. He's going to be the centerpiece, I think, of all the peer recruiting you have. But all those guys you named, all offensive pieces. You named two highly touted receivers, Webb, a highly touted running back. So it's the type of guys that are going to, Nico recruiting them is going to be more beneficial, obviously. Yeah. And I think getting Webb in is huge. I think that's probably the running back, at least the highest rated running back Tennessee is pursuing hard right now. And then Devin Hyatt, I think, is one that it's easy to think he's just going to come to Tennessee because of his brother. And he made 2 visits in the fall, which, again, I think you think, well, his brother's on the team. That's natural. He's from Columbia. But he played last year at IMG, is my understanding.
Yep.
And so he's not just making the 4-hour drive with his parents. He's making a full trip across the country, or maybe not across the country, but a long trip, probably a flight, if I had to guess, for the weekend.
It's a good bit away.
And yes, and I don't think that one's going to be a foregone conclusion that Tennessee's going to get him. He's been at Georgia, he's been at Alabama this spring. A lot of other big SEC teams going after him. Really bigger teams you'd think. I mean, he's a 4-star, but a low 4-star. But the big dogs in the SEC, South Carolina, another one that's going after him. And I think it's huge for Tennessee to get him back on campus a second time since the new year began.
Alabama, Georgia, Auburn, South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, Ole Miss, all teams who have an offer for Devin Hyatt out there. And again, you see what kind of his family brings to the table already being in that SEC environment, knowing that, hey, this is a good family that's working well in the system so far. So I think that also kind of adds into him being a highly touted recruit. But of course, you talk about 5-star quarterback Nico. He will be here in town at Farragut High School on Saturday and Sunday, taking part in a 7-on-7 tournament. People are going to get to go see it. People are going to get one of their first chances to see one of the most highly rated quarterbacks in the class live and in person, going through, doing what he does on the field. It's going to be at Farragut High School. We will have you more information on that on RockyTopInsider.com. But in the meantime, we're a little bit of wait and see, seeing what happens with this weekend with these recruits coming in town, seeing if any of them are a little bit swayed coming in and seeing the star power that's there. But at football right now, not short on any kind of storylines in the spring.
No, not at all. And, I mean, they'll be able to watch Tennessee's spring scrimmage, I imagine, too. Obviously not a spring game this year. And you talk about the guys Tennessee has back on the offensive side of the ball, the stability there and the instability in the defensive back room. You imagine that those receivers will see a lot of passing success on Saturday. At least that's what I'm expecting.
Yes, no doubt about it. Hey, talking about success, Ryan, you were there last night. It was cold, it was windy, it was rainy, but Tennessee baseball has found a whole heck of a lot of success this season. We're going to get into it. We're going to talk all about it and talk a little bit about the rotation. Blade Tidwell making his return. Seth Halverson could potentially be on the way, so we're going to get into all of that. We're going to talk a little bit of Tennessee baseball right here after the break. Don't go anywhere. Hey, this is the Rocky Top Insider Press Pass.
We'll be right back. And now, back to the show.
All right, and here we go, back here on the Rocky Top Insider Press Pass. Rick Butler, Ryan Schumpert hanging out with you. So we're talking a little bit about the Tennessee sports world right now. Boy, is there not a lack of stories to go around, and one of the ones that people have certainly been wanting to talk about, people have been talking about all throughout the spring so far, is Tennessee baseball with the #1 consensus ranking in the country. I mean, Ryan, before we even talk about the details of the team, just kind of talk to me about what really this means for Tennessee at this point in the season, rolling through SEC play, 3 SEC series wins under their belt without any losses. I mean, what is this on the, where's the magnitude of this on the scale of just college baseball?
Well, I think it's pretty big, and it more than anything, I think a lot of people, and not just to be like people love to hate Tennessee, but I think Tony Vitello and the way Tennessee's team plays and the way Tennessee's fan base reacts is makes them pretty dislikable characters, villains. They've embraced. And
yeah.
I think a lot of people that hoped or thought last year would just be a one-off run, it's been a pretty quick reminder that that's not the case, that Tennessee is here to stay, and it's only going to get built up as Lindsey Nelson Stadium grows and Tennessee keeps this thing rolling. But I think when you look at what they've done so far in the season, 9-0 in SEC play, and on paper, they've played their two hardest SEC series with road trips to Ole Miss and Vanderbilt. And really, I mean, I do think the top of the SEC is a little bit down this year. I don't think Mississippi State is obviously as good as they were last year when they won the championship. Florida kind of continues to be trending down with Sullivan. But for Tennessee to have done what it does, it's unprecedented. I mean, my dad was asking me on Sunday after the game, when do you think Tennessee will lose in SEC play? And these next 2 weekends, I mean, they're going to be favored to win pretty easily. And when you look at their starting pitching, they won't win forever. That's not how baseball works. You're going to lose games. But when your starting pitching is as good as Tennessee's is, it's a lot easier. It's a lot harder to find when that loss is going to come.
Yeah.
Because those three guys have just been fantastic the whole season. They haven't dropped off at all in the start of SEC play, and Tennessee's just getting kind of more weapons back on that pitching staff to come out of the bullpen.
Yeah, and you look at, I mean, they have faced some stout competition. I know that's one of the points that you just stated, but again, when you talk about these guys just, able to mow through SEC competition, it's not just pitching well on a Friday night. It's pitching well on a Friday night at Oxford, in Nashville, something along those lines. It was interesting. I did a radio interview last week, and in it, we were talking about Tennessee baseball, and they were kind of saying, it is hard to still project the season, though, and one of the reasons why it's difficult is because of injuries. You never know who's going to go down, and while that's true across any sport, across any, for any team, I actually think there's an interesting route to the injury conversation because in a lot of ways, Tennessee does know what they're getting, except this time it's just returning to the team. You know that Blade Tidwell is frankly back. He had a start last night on the diamond in Knoxville, and then you wrote a piece about Seth Halverson earlier today. I mean, these are two important arms that are going to come back to this rotation. Where do you see? What are they going to do with it? This is an abundance of talent right now.
You're right. I mean, it's the definition of a good problem to have for Tony Vitello and Frank Anderson.
This is not like how they say for quarterbacks, if you have two quarterbacks, you really don't have any quarterbacks. This is not like that, is it?
No, not at all. And you can never have too many good arms. I mean, we saw that last year. I think Tennessee's had good pitchers, but its bullpen depth was severely lacking. I think that hurt them when they got to Omaha and kind of had some guys running out of gas. But no, I mean, what happens with it? I don't see how you remove any of the guys from the weekend rotation now. And I mean, Drew Beam is the obvious candidate because he's not on Pitching Ninja every time he's pitching. He doesn't throw upper 90s. He's not going to be a top 15 pick in the MLB draft when his time comes. I say that. He may as well as he's been pitching. But when you look at it on paper, he's been their most effective guy. 0.38 ERA in 3 SEC starts. He's pitched almost 5 innings more than both Chase Burns and Chase Dollander have in SEC play, and he's just been incredibly effective. So I don't see how you remove any of those guys. Now, what I do say, and this kind of goes back to the injury point, these are 3 really young arms. Drew Beam did not pitch. He's a true freshman. He did not pitch his junior year of high school because of COVID. He did not pitch his senior year of high school due to an elbow injury. He's not throwing a ton of innings, and Tennessee's been throwing them out there a lot. I mean, all 3 of those guys, I think, in SEC play are averaging just under 7 innings an outing. Chase Dollander threw 48 innings last year at Georgia Southern. He's already at 38 innings right now. My only concern about the pitching staff is wearing those guys down. Do you put too much of a workload on them where they do have an injury or they're just not as effective by the end of the season because they don't have the stamina to go a full season? Because granted, none of these guys have gone a full college season. Dollander's the exception, and we just had his numbers there. He didn't pitch nearly as much at Georgia Southern last year as he's going to pitch this year. So I think that's the one thing you watch. But like you said, you have Blade Tidwell, you have Halverson, you have a lot of good bullpen arms. And what I'm curious about is they're not going to not start one of those guys on the weekend. But I wonder as they get into some of these more manageable series against Missouri, against Alabama, if you build a lead, are you more likely to say, hey, Beam, you're going to come out after you've thrown 75 pitches, sure, and we'll get a little bit, because they're trying to find ways to get work for guys. I mean, they didn't use Tidwell, who was a guy going into the year, projected top 15 pick, who was available in Vanderbilt, and they didn't use Ben Joyce, the volunteer fireman, who's all the rave in the baseball world. It's not even just the college baseball world. It's throwing 104 miles per hour.
One of the better nicknames I have heard just across the sports landscape. I think the fireman, the volunteer fireman, I think that's a good one. Whoever credit to whoever made
I
it.
think it's Pitching Ninja. That's the first person I saw
Okay.
put it out. So
Okay.
not even a person with any sort of Tennessee
No.
connections, but has quietly become one of Tennessee baseball's biggest supporters on the interwebs.
Blade Tidwell, you mentioned him a second ago. He had the start on the mound yesterday against Lipscomb. 2 innings pitched, 1 hit, and what did you see from him just in his return to the mound?
You know, he looked good. I think what impressed yesterday about him was his off-speed stuff. He commanded really well. That fastball still sitting mid-90s. I think topped out at 97, mostly 94 to 96. And you knew that was really good. And I think last year he had a kind of an up-and-down freshman year, but it was all about that breaking ball and him being able to locate that. He did a really good job of that yesterday. Again, just 2 innings against a Lipscomb opponent that's not fantastic and actually has 18 transfers. That's completely beside the point, but crazy having that many transfers. I mean, their whole roster is basically transfers, and he looked really good there. And I think the next step for him is seeing him in weekend action. He's been in the bullpen warming up at Ole Miss. He was in the bullpen warming up at Vanderbilt on Saturday. I think he's just kind of waiting for that opportunity, and really, I think, itching for a chance to get out there against top-notch competition.
You know, when you look at this Tennessee baseball team and you can look at the guys who are on the mound, you can look at the guys who are behind them in the infield or the outfield, you can look at the guys when they're at the plate. It's a different team for a lot of reasons because of the swagger that they bring to the table. And I know, by no means, is that, you know, talking about a new thought that nobody else has talked about before or bringing a new idea to the table that nobody's thought of before. But I just can't help but re-notice it every single time I watch. You know, baseball is such a fascinating game where you have to respect the game and you have to have a little bit of fun with the game. That's how these seasons go by. It's how you're able to continue success for a whole season instead of getting dragged into the long schedule to some degree. It's just one of the most fun teams in baseball when you watch them from a watching perspective, yes, but then also when you look at them play. The guys look like they're having an unbelievable amount of fun right there. And I just think that so many things have kind of come together in the right way for Tennessee, whether you look at the pitching or the coaching, or whether you look at the players, just the ability for those two to work together has truly been remarkable to see this year. For Tennessee now, it's going to be about the longevity of this success. So obviously we know that Tennessee has become one of the most standout teams, the standout team in all of baseball this year. But for the Volunteers, it has to be about longevity. You don't get any awards for mid-season sweeps, as great as they are. Tennessee is going to be focused on the postseason and beyond. What do you think about the longevity there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I said about the arms is the big question there, making sure those guys can hold up throughout a whole season. But, I mean, from a talent standpoint, the longevity should be there. I mean, there's no reason to think it's not, but at the same time, that's the nature of baseball is really good teams losing. I mean, we saw Arkansas last year was number 1 for most of the year. Loses to North Carolina State in the Super Regional. I think it's been over 20 years since the number 1 overall seed in the NCAA tournament won it all. So that's just the nature of baseball. There's going to be a lot of parity there. There's going to be a lot of opportunities to lose, and that's kind of one thing I look at is I do think Tennessee needs to play in some more close games because really outside of the Sunday game against Ole Miss, that was the only game where you got into the 9th inning, and it was real tight, a real high-leverage situation that they've been in so far this year. I guess Texas game was close to a game they lost. So it is natural that you would think they're going to have more close games just because that's how baseball works. But I think that's kind of the one thing I look at, you know, before they get in the postseason play. They need be a little more battle tested in some tight contests.
No doubt about it. There are 3 opportunities to see Tennessee baseball in action coming up this weekend. Friday at 6:30 p.m., Saturday at 7 o'clock p.m., Sunday at 1. By the way, Saturday is just looking like a massive day in general. You have the all-vol weekend on campus, right?
Yep.
And then, again, like we talked about a little bit earlier, it's when you're going to get to go see Nico Iamaleava go play in that 7-on-7 tournament at Farragut High School. So plenty of things to do this weekend if you are looking to get into a little bit of Tennessee sports action. But, Ryan, we have covered football. We have covered a little bit of baseball. One more topic on the menu to get to, that is Tennessee basketball. We had some big news coming out earlier this week. We will get into that about the NBA draft and much more. Don't go anywhere. It's the Rocky Top Insider Press Pass.
We'll be right back. And now, back to the show.
All right, here we go. Back to the Rocky Top Insider Press Pass. You got Rick Butler. You got Ryan Schumpert. We're getting into the third act of the podcast here right now. Already talked a little bit of Tennessee football. Already talked a little bit of Tennessee baseball. Now we're going to move on to the hardwood. We're going to talk a little bit about Tennessee basketball. Ryan, the big news that came out of Knoxville yesterday, Kennedy Chandler went on ESPN to talk about it. Kennedy Chandler, Tennessee superstar freshman point guard, officially heading to the NBA draft. What is your initial reaction from it?
Not that it's not a surprise. I mean, I think that's been the
Yes.
expectation from Tennessee's camp from the moment he stepped on campus is that he would be here for 1 year, and they made a push to try to get him to come back and, kind of that TJ Ford mold of come back for your sophomore year. And I think Ford was projected as a late first-round pick, kind of fringe after his freshman year. He came back and was a top 10 pick. So, but Kennedy, I think kind of put those questions to rest the last 2 weeks of the season. I mean, he was excellent in the NCAA tournament, SEC tournament to close the regular season. I mean, you've seen that in draft boards. I think he's up to 19 on ESPN's post-NCAA tournament mock draft. So good for him. I mean, I think that was the expectation, and Tennessee now looks to officially move on in the post-Kennedy Chandler era and kind of figuring out what they're going to have at point guard besides Zakai Ziegler.
Yeah, Kennedy was, what a fascinating season for him at Tennessee. Obviously was in that starting lineup the whole time, had some monster games at the beginning of the season, and it's actually kind of fascinating because in hindsight, Coach Barnes would talk about through the end of the season, kind of right there before those tournaments, how he actually felt like those were bad games for kind of the course of Kennedy's career because it maybe teaches you some bad habits when you can go out there and just drop 22, 24, 26 points against a team like Colorado on the road. Kennedy really had to buckle down through a lot of the middle portion of the year, especially when conference play was starting. He had to kind of really work and say, hey, here's how I need to approach scouting reports. Here's how I need to approach people scouting me. Here's what I need to do to get the offense more involved. Here's what I need to do to mainly be a good defensive player. I thought you saw a lot of those kind of aspects combined together throughout the season. And then to go along with your point a second ago, he was able to really kind of put everything together through the end of the year and had a really nice stretch through the SEC and NCAA tournaments. I find it fascinating to look at where he's kind of projected to go in this NBA draft. Most of these projections right now have him just before about the 20th pick, kind of sitting right there in the 17, 18, 19, 20 realm. I know the Bulls, the Timberwolves, the Pacers, there are a couple teams around there, but it does look like Tennessee is going to get their third first-round pick in the last 2 years.
Yeah, and I mean, where he's projected, it will kind of be close to see if he's the highest rated pick in the Rick Barnes era. I think Keon Johnson went 22 last year. Grant Williams went 23 a couple years back. So he's kind of right in that range where he's going to have a chance to maybe be the highest rated guy. And unlike Keon, who I think kind of his draft stock dropped over the course of his season in Knoxville, Kennedy's, I think it's been a little fluctuating, but I think overall has improved. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I think the big things for him defensively, figuring out what he needs to do night in and night out, to be successful on that end. And I think adjusting to the fact that each team is going to play him and is going to play Tennessee different and kind of not approaching every game with the same mindset. I think those are the two big things that stand out. And then his three-point shooting was red hot at the beginning of the season.
Yeah.
Got cold there in December and into January and then kind of returned to form in February. And I think that is as big as a reason of anything of why he's going to be a first-round pick.
All right, real quick. This is for the people out there, too. Trivia. Ready? If Tennessee guard Kennedy Chandler is drafted before the 19th pick in the first round, he will be the highest drafted Tennessee player since blank went at number 13
I know it already.
in 2002.
I already knew it. 2002. I don't really.
Whoa!
I
Plot
didn't know
twist.
it.
Plot twist.
Well, Tobias Harris was my first thought because I thought he went into the lottery. Maybe he didn't. In 2002, oh man, I know Hayslip. Is that how you pronounce it?
That is correct.
Funny story enough, I've delivered food to him in Franklin a handful of times when I was in high school. Not a very good tipper. Well, I won't hold that against you, Marcus. But yeah, because it was funny. He had, massive dude. You could tell he was an athlete and had like some Tennessee stuff. So I didn't even know who he was at the time, but looked him up, figured it out. I think it was a short run in the NBA before going overseas and playing basketball there for about a decade.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now living in Franklin, Tennessee.
There you go.
Well, I don't know. As of about 3 years ago, he was living there.
So to answer your question from a second ago, Tobias Harris was pick number 19 in the 2011 draft. So yes, if Kennedy does go before before the 19th pick, because again that's where Tobias was, he'll be the highest drafted Tennessee player since Marcus Hayslip was drafted at number 13 in 2002.
The Bucks, is that right? Am I imagining that?
Oh. I think my memory might be getting it might be a little bit past my memory, but I actually think you're right. It's one of those light bulb moments where it seems like the light bulb's trying to come on, give you a thumbs up there, but I know you'll get that figured out.
That's what it was.
Okay.
Milwaukee Bucks.
There you go. All right, so we also had a little another bit of Tennessee news yesterday as Tennessee had a big man go in the transfer portal. Anji Tamba, he is in the transfer portal as of Tuesday afternoon. This was a kid who grew up right here in Knoxville, went to Knoxville Catholic, and now is in the transfer portal after just 1 year at Tennessee. This is also a kid that had to reclassify. He was from the 2022 class, went into the 2021 class, and again, like we mentioned a second ago, graduating from Knox Catholic a little bit early in order to do so. Did redshirt his one and only collegiate season at Tennessee in those 35 games. What was kind of your first initial take on this yesterday?
Well, I don't think it was shocking.
Yeah, not really.
I mean, you didn't know that it was coming per se, but you did think Tennessee was probably going to clear out some spots to try to bring in some other guys, and it was hard to see his path to playing time. Certainly next year, and even in the midterm. I mean, they brought him in as a project to develop him, and I think figured out exactly what they had in him in a year, and decided to. Best for both parties to go their separate ways, and I don't think it was a surprise by any means, but certainly interesting to see. And when you really look at it, I think in the long term, Tennessee brings back a lot of big men this year, but after this season, my expectation, you're going to lose Olivier Camois. Euros Plasic could come back for another year, but that's not a given, and I think there'll be a great chance that Brandon Huntley-Hatfield will be looking to go to the pros after next season. So Tennessee's going to have a lot of big men leaving after the next season, and really, Jonas Adu is the one guy that you've seen, and you feel pretty confident he'd be back. And not that you knew that Tamba was going to be able to contribute on that team, but he was kind of another body at least. And I think it kind of points out the need for Tennessee to bring in some prep big men maybe in this class, and probably a need to hit the transfer portal at the end of next season.
Yeah, it's along the same lines that I was thinking though. You feel decent about what Tennessee is going to have on the roster next year, but they do move away from Tamba, like you said. Likely to probably open up a couple of spots for next year. But Ryan, you and I have been looking at the last couple of weeks about players that could be coming to Tennessee through the portal, through something like that. I'll tell you, the guy that I have my eye on, and I'm sure that a lot of college programs out there have their eye on, it's Nigel Pack. He was Kansas State's guard last year, who was just an unbelievable scorer. I mean, one of those guys who has just natural scoring ability from anywhere on the court. He is a shooter. He can drive it in. He can go off a cut or off a screen or something along those lines. But I think this is a player that Tennessee could really benefit from him. One kind of knock on him that I heard a little bit is that his defense is kind of considered good, not great. It's where Rick Barnes steps into play. That's why I think that Nigel Pack could be such a great addition for this, really a needed and a valuable addition for this Tennessee team. Any one or two players that stick out in your mind?
Yeah, and I'll just add on that. I'll plug my guy Evan Malakawa here. His website has a bunch of great stuff with the transfer portal and transfer portal rankings, and he does offensive rankings, defensive rankings. To your point, Pack is his number 5 player in transfer portal right now. He's got a 30 offensive grade, a 6.8 defensive grade. The next lowest player defensive grade is number 11 at 3.7. So definitely not a defensive strength, but offensively a complete player, like you said. Both his first 2 seasons at Kansas State shot over 40% from 3, shot 45% from 3 last year, which, I mean, think about it, that's what Santiago Vescovi shot in SEC play, and he was the best shooter in the conference. So that's, game changer if you get him. But like you said, Tennessee's going after him hard, but so is everybody else. A few other names, I think. Probably the other biggest name in the portal right now for Tennessee is Brandon Murray, a freshman guard at LSU. Now you talk about Pack not being a defensive guy. This is a guy that completely fits Rick Barnes' mold, a complete defensive player right away from his freshman year on, 6'5", so kind of in that Josiah range. He handled the ball some for LSU when Xavier Pinson was injured last year. Not really a true point guard, but plays on the wing. I think has the versatility to maybe grow into playing the 4, but a really good player for LSU. Another guy a lot of programs are going at. He's from Maryland, one of LSU's assistant coaches, one of their main recruiters under Will Wade. Kevin Nickelberry is now at Georgetown, so obviously the closeness there to his hometown. I think a lot of Georgetown's been going hard after literally every LSU player's in the portal, but I think they're going hard after a handful of LSU players, and I think Auburn's going hard after him too. So another one that I think firm competition for Tennessee, but I think Tennessee is in a little bit deeper there and could have a great chance. And I think after that, those are the top 2 guys, and then you get down after that, and Will Richard at Belmont, Tyreek Key at Indiana State, or a couple other guys that I think Tennessee is at least evaluating right now and analyzing. But I don't think Tennessee's really going all in on anybody besides those top two.
It is a new day. Yes, it is. The relaunch of the Rocky Top Insider Press Pass podcast is in the books. First one of many that we're going to be getting into, Ryan, over the summer, leading you into the fall, the spring coming back a year from now. This is going to be it for us, the RTI Press Pass. Hey, make sure you are subscribing wherever you can get your podcast, wherever you are listening to this right now. And then, of course, make sure you are always going and getting your Tennessee sports coverage. Make sure you're locked into the RTI network, RockyTopInsider.com. You can go and find us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. Hey, where you are, we are also there as well. But hey, that's going to do it for Ryan and I. You can go and find Ryan on Twitter at rshump00. You can also find him on the RTI feed as well. And then, of course, if you want to go and follow me, you can follow me at Rick_Butler. But otherwise, make sure you're locking into Rocky Top Insider